Good evening. Let's call this meeting of the Champaign County Board, the Special Finance Committee of the whole to order. It is 6:35. Can we have a roll call, please?
Goss,
Here.
Harper,
Here.
Hartke,
Here.
King, Marsh,
Here.
McGuire, Michaels, Mitchell, Patterson,
Here.
Petrie,
Present.
Rector, Rosales, Summers, Tinsley, Alex, Anderson, Clemens, Cowart, Cruz, Esri,
Here.
Furtado, and Weibel.
Present. We have a quorum. Seek approval of the agenda.
So
Moved
moved.
by Esri, second by Petrie. Discussion. See none, all in favor? All opposed? Motion carries. Now it's time for public comment on the proposed FY 2018 budget. Is anybody from the public wish to comment on it at this time? Please step up to the microphone, state your name for the record, and then
All right. So I'm Stuart Levy of Champaign, 1108 Foley. And it's possible that I missed it, but I think that there was a recommendation that the Institute for Law and Policy Planning made to this board several years ago that Al Kalmanoff told you all it would save money immediately if implemented, and that is the pretrial services program. And I know that some elements of pretrial services have been implemented, but there was a test, there was a supposed test, which was run by Julia Reed's office and dismissed after a few weeks, but the test didn't even do the things that the ILPP had suggested should happen, which included hiring a couple of people to be doing things like looking into the backgrounds of people who are coming in and so on. It takes an expenditure. Kalmanoff, who knows his business, told this board that it would save you money immediately if you did it. And it hasn't happened, and as far as I can tell, it's not slated to happen in this budget. So in, I guess it would be the next year's budget, you'll probably have an additional $250,000, $300,000 of expenses to pay for a new administrator to add to the other administrators, depending on what you end up paying the new county administrative person. I don't know where you're going to find that money, but you might as well look for things that will save you money and give you more margin to hire an administrator with. I can think of lots better things you could do than hire an expensive administrator, but I hope you will look, while you still have a little time to do it, at actually funding a pretrial services budget as the ILPP recommended in 2013. Thank you.
is there further comment from the public? See none, thank you. Communications. Any communications? See none, we move on to next item, approval of direction to county administrator for finalization of the FY 2018 budget. I'm going to pass the gavel over to Mr. Alex.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For those of you who have been a part of this process before, this will be somewhat familiar. For those of you who haven't, welcome. There'll be no final decisions made tonight, but the real goal here of meeting in more of a informal committee setting is to be able to sort of hear everybody out on issues that they have with the budget, specifically on decision points. Mr. Snyder obviously will play a key role as he takes us through those decision points, as will Ms. Ogden, and I would like to let him start. I think our general approach here, we'll get through the easy stuff first, and then I think everybody knows probably the largest decision point regards the nursing home issues, so we'll probably spend 99% of our time on that, but let's start with Rick, and we'll get the little stuff out of the way first.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to have a few slides to walk through just the general environment and make some comments before we get into the actual decision points. But I just want to remark that the first governmental budget meeting that I went into, I wore a hard hat, and I don't think that the environment has changed a whole lot since that time. Budgeting is hard. There's always never enough money. And so I think rather than wear my hard hat today, I'm going to start with a quote which I think is appropriate and also somewhat inspirational to me. So Ms. Ogden, if you can go to the next slide, we'll show this quote, and it's one from President Obama. It says, "Change will not come if we wait for some other person or some other time. We are the ones we've been waiting for. We are the change that we seek." I know that one of the things we do when we work in a government is we try to make progress on the challenges that face the people we represent. And change is essential to progress, but change is really hard too. I can tell you that one of the things that we've been talking a lot about is the ERP system, for example. You know, putting an ERP system in is really important for the county, but the challenge in that is not going to be figuring out how to pay for it or the technology that we're going to adopt. The biggest part of that process that's going to be a challenge is the cultural change that's required. We're going to have to deal with changes to processes that may have been in place for decades, and to overcome that inertia is going to be the real challenge with that. So as we go forward with the budget, I think that I want to let you know that I see that for the next 2 years here, which is this term and the next 2 budgets that you will be adopting for the county, I think there's going to be some very important opportunities for the board to do some things that you may not have a chance to do later on. And some of you will be here for future boards. Some of you may be leaving the board after this year, I don't know, or after this term. But it's an opportunity to have some impact on what the county's future will look like. The next slide, please. So why do we budget, besides it being a required activity under the law? I had the chance when I went through graduate school to study under a very good person. His name is James Jimenez, and he is the former cabinet secretary in New Mexico of finance and also former chief of staff under Governor Bill Richardson. He knows a lot about both state finance and municipal finance. He's been a city manager for many years down in New Mexico. And so the 2 things I took away from the class that were important is that, first of all, budgets are an instrument of political will. This is the way that the governing body decides what is important. And in county government, of course, that's somewhat difficult because we balance that with the need to fulfill all the statutory requirements we have. We don't have as much latitude, perhaps, as some other government bodies. And then when you think of the restraints on revenues, that limits us a little further. And that's to the second point there, which is that there are never enough resources to satisfy all the demands that we believe are there, that our constituents tell us are there. So again, it's just it's the only way we can provide some kind of prioritization for the money that we do have and how we want to expend it. So going into this budget year, I think we had talked a little bit about the environmental factors that we're facing. We have relatively low inflation. It's just a little bit over 2%, which is good. Revenue performance has been mixed. We have really strong real estate growth, almost 5% growth in EAV for FY18. Sales taxes have been mixed. We do have a state budget now, which is really good, but some of the things in the budget haven't been so good for us. We haven't gotten our catch-up yet on Medicaid, which is a little bit of a concern. The Department of Revenue is now charging a 2% surcharge to cover cost of distribution, so that's going to result in almost $100,000 loss of revenue on our public safety sales tax. So it'll be reduced from 1.2 to 1.1 million. And then the local government distribution fund has also been reduced by a 10% cut. That's our income tax receipts. That's $316,000 over this year and the next fiscal year. So there's going to be some things we have to reckon with. Looking at our current and future needs, the Strategic Planning Committee has started looking at our goals and objectives for the future. And while we haven't issued any kind of final report yet, the discussion seems to center around the 5 items that are listed there on the slide. First of all, we're preparing in the near term for the transition to the county executive form of government. A lot of decisions need to be made about that. We have the ERP replacement. Behavioral health has been a big issue in our community. We know that this is something that affects not only the community at large, but also impacts decisions that we make regarding our corrections operations and how we deal with the people who are incarcerated there, or how we might be able to avoid incarcerating people. We have the nursing home decision to make, which is a lot of import in terms of finances and also human services. And then the last item is dealing with some facilities issues. The one that's probably most critical right now is dealing with the downtown sheriff's office and jail. So how are we going to fulfill all these needs? We're not expecting any increases in revenue outside of maybe a little bit of growth in our existing revenue streams, but we're not going to get any new taxes. So the things that I think that are possible here is that we can look to reducing our cost structure and maybe yielding some economies there that will allow us to do some things. If we can consolidate facilities, if we can implement technology that will let us be more productive and efficient in what we do, and also change some of the processes. And also to look again at what our priorities should be for our expenditures. We have to fulfill our statutory requirements, but I think we also ought to take a look at what our community needs are and make sure that those are also balanced with the other things that we do. More specifically, we'll talk about the nursing home, since that's probably going to be the biggest issue tonight. There were 2 budget options presented previously to the board, an A option and a B option. The A option contemplated a full 12 months of operations for the nursing home. Part of this includes a recovery plan. The numbers that we received from SAK basically put us back to a break-even position based on some of the improvements they think they can make in operations, and also increase census. The one thing it didn't do was address the $4 million that we have to repay to vendors. That's basically $4 million to get us to 60 days out of aging on our accounts payable, and also repay loans and other monies that the nursing home owes. If we do that over a period of time, I think 3 years is probably reasonable. I think that we need to make cuts of about $1.35 million per year for the next 3 years to at least put us on a path where we can satisfy vendor demands, and also start thinking about rebuilding the fund balance for the nursing home, and also fund capital needs. The current budget doesn't allow for any kind of depreciation, and as you know, that's about $750,000 a year, and it hasn't been allocated since 2005. It also means that we'll probably have to look at, in terms of cuts, reducing general fund staff, because there's nowhere else to be able to, we can get that money from. Since 2008, the county's already cut, I think, around 10% of the staff, and also made economies on commodities and services. And we reached a point where we can't cut commodities and services anymore, so the only place left really is to take a look at staffing. Now, some alternatives to this might include, one is can we increase the census enough to where we can generate enough positive cash flow to offset some losses and having to make cuts to general fund departments. So we asked SAK again to come up with some ideas on this. They've proposed also a 3-year period with budgets for 2018, 19, 20, and 21, to where we would be able to generate at the last year about $2 million of positive cash flow. That means that we would get the census back up above where we were, around 180 people, but it also has a heavy reliance on increasing the Medicare A and B census. This is something that concerns me because over the past 7 years of budgets, MPA also proposed increasing Medicare census, and each year we fell short of those numbers. And that ended up in some years with over $1 million difference between what we budgeted in revenue and what we actually attained. Medicare has always been a difficult animal, but and it's also the key to being able to be profitable. And so I'm just not sure that that's something that's going to be truly feasible to do. The other option is that we would also seek additional tax revenue, such as running another referendum on increasing the nursing home operating levy. That would certainly help with the finances of the nursing home. The only issue with that is that it doesn't address any other county needs. And as you know, we have about a $2.5 million annual deficit in terms of funding facilities needs, not to mention any other services that we've been talking about. Behavioral health and reentry are two of the ones that we've talked about quite a bit. Option B contemplated a budget that would include 6 months of operations and 6 months of wind down of the operations in contemplation of potential transaction with the nursing home. Some of the possibilities here depend exactly on whether or not we're able to market the home successfully and getting a sufficient amount of money for the home. What could potentially happen is that we get some fund balance recovery out of this. Any proceeds that are remaining from satisfying all of the vendor debts and other loans that we have, the GO bond that we need to pay off, those potentially could go to helping restore the general fund balance, or potentially also going to capital asset replacement fund, which has been declining for a number of years, and we have not had any opportunity to refund that fund. One other thing that would happen is that if we were to proceed with that option, sometime next year, the board would also need to make a decision about what to do with the levy. So under PTEL, the monies that are allocated to the nursing home operating levy could actually be shifted to other levies, including the general fund. So that's something that will have to be looked at. Again, the board will have to establish priorities to determine the best way to possibly spend that revenue. So next we'll go into the actual decision points. This slide here is just a reminder of where we're at today. We currently have about $150,000 revenue to expenditure deficit for next year. And so the proposed changes that we are asking you to look at tonight will help us close that gap. The first decision point involves the municipal aggregation civic contribution. We are allowed to collect under statute an additional contribution for organizing the municipal aggregation program for electricity. It's a 1/10 cent contribution on top of the rate that is paid by ratepayers. If we do this, it will still result in savings to ratepayers, but they will provide us, in its notes here, the average amount that a ratepayer would pay is about $9 a year that would go to the county. And it would result in about $93,000 in additional revenue for the county based on the last several years of average usage of the program. The program is voluntary. People can opt out if they don't wish to participate or if they find a better deal, so there's no requirement that they provide this contribution when they do this. But if they do go into the program, they would be asked to provide the contribution. The next item involves a transfer of monies. We have a one-time project that is currently being funded out of general fund. We would like to transfer $70,000 out of public safety sales tax fund balance to fund the facilities needs for next year. This is related specifically to a project for the adult detention center, and it needs to be completed within the next fiscal year. Those were the first two options that we provided to you. If we do both of those would provide sufficient offset to close the budget gap for the next fiscal year. Some of the other ones, we had one other one that was recommended if you wanted to consider, and that was implementing a 3-month hiring deferral for any vacancies that occur in the departments. This would require the cooperation of all the elected department heads to implement, since they control hiring decisions within their areas under the statutes. We estimate that potential savings being about $99,000 by just pushing back hiring when someone leaves for about 3 months. We have some alternative options for you to consider. We could ask our departments to implement a 1% cut from their expenditures. For those budgets that are over $250,000, those expenditures would apply to non-personnel areas. The other item was to eliminate the 1% merit increase for non-bargaining employees. I think I previously expressed my concern about doing that because of creating a disparity potentially between bargaining unit members and non-bargaining unit members, since the bargaining unit members will be receiving a 2% increase in most cases this year. The savings from that is about $70,000. So I think that you would be able to close the budget deficit at this point with those first two items that we've recommended. And then the last decision point involves the nursing home, whether to adopt Budget A or Budget B. So I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have at this point.
Let me speak to the committee quickly, I guess, on the decision points on the previous slide. Are there any committee members who object to giving direction to the county administrator to pursue these two approaches to balance the general corporate fund budget? If not, I think we'll proceed with that. Obviously, this isn't final, but
Just to clarify, it's
give Rick some
it's up there now, right?
Yes,
Okay.
I'm sorry, no, I'm sorry, one more back. The municipal aggregation civic contribution and.
The transfer.
We'll go to the next slide. I'm sorry, sorry, who's driving? And, yeah, and the offset, the $70,000 offset for the facilities improvements. No, I just need nobody to say no. Okay, so I think we got some direction there. So I just want to say a couple things too, for any members of the public who may be listening or members of the board who may be confused about this. There has been discussion about public safety sales tax money as well in this budget. You know, a year ago we were noting that in the coming year the retirement of a bond being serviced by the public safety sales tax money would result in $1.1 to $1.2 million in additional, not additional revenue, but reduced expenses against the public safety sales tax. So I've got a number of questions about where that money is in the budget. There's a little bit of it all over, but I think the key points are some of it is allocated to initial work on replacing the 40-year-old accounting and information technology system, which is something that this board's identified as both a thing that will save the county money going forward and a critical need. A fair amount of it's going to backfill general corporate fund needs to make up for loss of fee revenue and loss of state shared revenue. The public safety sales tax can reimburse the general corporate fund for public safety related public safety related costs like utilities for public safety related buildings and so forth. And so this year we're increasing that amount of reimbursement in recognition of the fact that the general corporate fund has other needs that it's unable to meet. For example, covering the expenses for the general obligation supplemental construction bond for the nursing home, which was shifted to the nursing home budget 8 years ago or so because the general corporate fund couldn't afford to pay for it, and now is sort of back in the general corporate fund because the nursing home budget can't carry it. A couple things that this does not include. It does not include a new, and some is programmed for facilities improvement or facilities repair, deferred maintenance issues related to public safety buildings. It does not include a new jail. It does not include a new jail project. It does not include new justice system programs. It is basically a caretaker budget until we can get the overall county budget situation more stable. So I wanted to make sure everybody understood that. I don't know, Rick or Tammy, if you want to add anything to that or correct anything, please feel free. You're more in touch with this than I am.
About $373,000 of that money is in 2018 will go to purchase mobile portable radios for the Sheriff's Department. There was no reserve funding for those items in the Capital Asset Replacement Fund, so they have to be fully funded next year. And I believe they are going on 11 years old.
The thing I would note is that none of the things I just mentioned, other than the decline in fee and state shared revenues, are ongoing costs. The radios are a one-time cost. The facilities work, although obviously there's an infinity of it to be done. these particular projects, I understand, are a one-time thing. And the issue with the nursing home general obligation bonds obviously will be based on what happens in the nursing home. So I think will be an opportunity in the next year's budget process to look again at that money and determine how those resources may be allocated, whether that's more to facilities work, whether it's more to programs, what opportunities we have there. But I did want to address that because I was expecting to have more money than we have, and when we went through the budget process and looked at sort of all the things that are draining on the general corporate fund and on the public safety sales tax budget, there really wasn't any left over. So it's fortunate that we were able to retire that bond last year, because if we weren't, we'd be $1 million in the hole. So I guess we can talk about the nursing home. I've said for the last several months, I think there's sort of three keys to declaring a situation with the nursing home sustainable, and one is obviously operating solvency, getting the nursing home to the point where it's taking in more money, or as much money as it's paying out, something SAK seems to be making progress on. They have shown a budget going out several years that indicates they believe they'll be able to do that. However, as Rick said, it does depend heavily on an increase in Medicare census, which we've not been particularly successful at generating in the past. There is significant competition for those dollars. They're obviously making progress over there in terms of cost containment, in terms of organizational changes that seem to be pushing things in the right direction.
May I interrupt you really quickly there? So to clarify on the Medicare, the budget proposes an increase going from 1.7 million in revenue currently to about 3.2 million on the Medicare. And it also assumes that the Medicaid census will remain no more than 50% of the home census.
And the second key sort of sustainability of the nursing home is the ability to deal with capital replacement, renewal of the building and the equipment. Obviously, we're still paying on the building, and we'll be doing so for 4 more years. But the building does age, and over time, obviously, money needs to be set aside, whether you want to call it depreciation, capital asset replacement, whatever you want to classify it as. There needs to be a stream of money there to be able to make sure that the facility itself doesn't deteriorate, which is obviously a problem we've faced with other county facilities. And then finally, and I think the most exigent issue with regard to the nursing home is the amount of outstanding vendor payments that are owed. We've basically been sustaining the facility for the last year or two. It's been under considerable pressure as a result of the delays largely as a result of the delays in Medicaid approvals from the state. And the way that we've been dealing with that cash flow crunch is by essentially borrowing money from vendors. Some of them are okay with that, some are less okay with that, some are upset about that, some are okay with making 12 or 13 or 14% interest. But it's a significant amount of money, and so the easy way out at this point would appear to be a sale. It generates revenue, or generates a one-time payment to the county, which would be sufficient to be able to discharge all these past debts. On the other hand, there are many board members have made a strong, and members of the public have made a strong case for why they believe that the nursing home is a valuable asset to the community. And so if one is going to say that and want to work to come up with a budget scenario in which we can continue to operate the nursing home, I would ask that those efforts address this issue of vendor payments, because to me that's the nut I haven't been able to figure out how to crack. I think if we were able to if we were able to zero those out and start fresh, I think SAK has even said that they believe that they would be able to get the nursing home in a situation where it would be sustainable. But another option we've talked about would be having a community group step up and want to operate the nursing home as more of a publicly focused institution. I'm certainly supportive of those efforts. I know there have been discussions that haven't been particularly fruitful, but on the other hand, we haven't gone to anybody with really a solid offer at this point. I think this board could probably be persuaded to forego some money if that were to happen, come up with an arrangement that would allow a community group to take over the operating responsibility initially and either reimburse the county for building expenses over time or provide that to a not-for-profit operator at a discounted cost. And I would be happy to pursue a budget in anticipation of that type of an approach. The problem is I don't see how that approach can provide any money for the county to discharge this vendor debt. So we're not in a great situation. I mean, the good news is the nursing home is, SAK has been able to do some good things in terms, I think the quality's up. I think the morale over there is fairly good, and I think it's still an excellent facility. But somebody needs to tell me how we're going to deal with getting these vendors paid, because that's, to me, what has made anything other than the sales scenario of budget be seem like something we probably can't responsibly budget for. So I'm pretty much done talking. I'd be happy to hear from any board members who are supportive of sale, not supportive of the sale, willing to propose an alternative to either or. Ms. Petrie.
I have a couple of comments / questions. First, to the public safety sales tax money. 100,000 goes to reentry and roughly under 240,000 to the Youth Assessment Center. So far, we have not had any documentation as to how well that money is being spent, is there success or not. And the Mental Health Board is giving the Youth Assessment Center an additional 70,000. I'm not arguing one way or the other as to whether we should continue or not. What I am arguing, it would be very nice to have some report just sort of flowed into the budget, and we haven't had any information how the Youth Assessment Center is working these days and how well reentry is working. So I'd like to hear that before we have a final vote on the budget. To the nursing home, I've asked for two things which haven't happened.
I'm sorry, Ms. Petrie, if I can interrupt you.
What?
From who would you like to hear those?
Well, there's a director of the Youth Assessment Center, and I do think it would be good to have that brought before the county board and the folks working on the reentry program to hear from them, and we haven't.
Thank you.
Okay, and now to the nursing home. Previously, I did ask, we'd have to use a number of assumptions, but a lot of the projection for the home to be sustainable is dependent on Medicare. And we've talked about everybody has their hand in the pot of Medicare, and there's only X number of Medicare within the county, and there's Y number of homes in the county. And I do think to have a realistic, well, can't be really realistic because we'd have to work with some assumptions, but to get some handle on the possibility of what percentage it possibly we could rely on from a budgetary perspective in relationship to Medicare. The amount that you mentioned is, what was it, about a twofold increase, right? Okay.
That's correct.
If I'm roughly remembering the numbers that you presented, that may be accurate and it may not be accurate, but I do think we need something to work with to have some judgment on that. I stated also previously that I've always argued that we need to work forward for the home to be sustainable, but I don't mean sustainable that we Band-Aid it every year from now on. I'm looking at, can we set things up so the home is sustainable for a decade? And right now we're talking about Band-Aids still in conjunction with a home. So we really need to have a little bit more information going forward on what might be the case. The last thing that I had mentioned, and we still haven't gotten any data on that, and though it is a group of assumptions, and that is if in fact we took whiteout paint and negated all of the back debts and everything, and we had a new line in the sand as to the expenses, et cetera, on the nursing home, if in fact it can be sustainable. You're talking about 50% Medicaid now and whatever percentage of Medicare. The math is if you have 50% Medicaid to balance off that deficit of payment, then we need 50% of that, which would be 25% Medicare to offset it and just to keep a straight line on the budget. And are those reasonable things that we could look toward? That doesn't answer Chris's concern, and that is how do we pay the vendors? But that is an exercise to see if in fact we can move toward getting that home to a point of sustainability. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Petrie. Mr. Anderson, sorry, Ms. Cruz, which one you got your hand up first? Go ahead, Jack.
Just following up on what Patsy said. I've been on the advisory board for the nursing home for going on 3 years now. And it's been the constant battle, if you will, to find a way to attract more Medicaid or Medicare beds. MPA remodeled a portion of the nursing home to make it more attractive. The rooms are bigger, nicer, new furniture, with the hopes of attracting more Medicare clients, which did not come to fruition. During my time on that board, what I've come to realize is all nursing homes in the community are really battling for the same clients. So it's not as if we can say, well, we'll expect an increase in Medicare clients. There's no reason to expect that unless you can market yourself and pull those away from the other homes. And then those homes will suffer. There's only so many out there, and you've got so many homes trying to compete for those numbers. And that's why MPA was unsuccessful. For a variety of reasons why people pick a nursing home, whether it's proximity to their home, they just like it, they had relatives there. There doesn't seem to be a lot of switching around in the county as far as Medicare beds moving around. They seem to be pretty stable. So I think SAK can bring in some more Medicare clients, but it won't be to the number that we can sustain the nursing home and expect a twofold increase in our Medicare patients. So just speaking from my experience, I meant to be brief, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. I was going to note, I meant to say this during Ms. Petrie's comment, the number of Medicaid patients, number of Medicare patients required to generate a given improvement in revenue is significantly fewer than the number of Medicaid patients to generate the same improvement in revenue. So I agree that MPA's numbers are large. Whether they're unrealistically large, I don't know. But I don't have on the sheet that you gave me, Rick, the number of how many additional Medicare patients. It's actually going from, they say 1.7 million, 1.77 million they're budgeting in 2018 to 3.1 million in 2021, so over a 3-year period. That's an increase of $1.3 million a year. I don't know, do you know how many patients that represents?
It's about 17 Medicare patients by 2021. I think the home has either 3 or 4 right now in the census. We anticipate that there will be some additions by the end of this year. The census currently stands at 135 as of today, a slight improvement. There have been some new admissions thanks to the efforts of the new marketing director that's started work there. We still, though, need to get to about 144 our total census by the beginning of FY18 in order to fulfill the budget that's been presented by SAK. So otherwise, there's going to be probably a shortfall in revenue and also some additional demands.
And of
because
that 144, you say three are currently Medicare?
I believe that's correct.
You know
I'm not sure the exact number right now.
You know what number of Medicare is assumed in the 2018 budget?
I think
From that
it's,
144?
do you happen to have that, Tammy? I don't have it in front of me, I'm sorry.
4,
I can-
5, 10,
I can,
8?
Chris, if I've done the numbers right, I think they roughly allow $607 per day per Medicare patient. And at 1.7, that would be 7.62. So that, we would have to double our Medicare load right now to get to that 2018 number.
Okay, thank you.
So 3.2 would be almost doubling again to almost 14.2.
Right, you said 17 point something, I thought, but
Yeah,
Your
it
math may be-
depends what number. I mean,
yeah. Obviously, the math may change over the years. or
what's the
yeah.
future look like for Medicare?
Okay.
the
Yeah,
census
thanks,
is right around, in 2021, the census would be right around 180. And with 17 Medicare and no more than about 51% Medicaid.
Okay, thanks. Thank you for your patience, Shanna. Ms. Cruz.
I just have a couple of questions. So if the walkie-talkies in the sheriff's office are 11 years old, can we push it to 12 years old for this budget? Or is that not a possibility? Tammy or Rick?
I'm reluctant to speak for the sheriff, but I think that there's a possibility that could be deferred.
Okay. And then public safety tax money, could that be applied to the backlog at the nursing home? Like that 300,000?
It's not eligible to be used
Okay.
directly for that. What you would need to do is find some other maybe offset in the general fund that you could apply to that would be eligible for public safety sales tax funds, and
Okay.
then use the other money to cover that.
Okay.
So,
And then I guess kind of the other question is, I could have missed this, but have we even heard an update from the broker? I mean, is it realistic to look at a 6-month timeline? And what happens if we go past that? Are we back in the same place in the month? 2
So
months?
let me give you a quick update on where we are. The state's attorney has been working with 2 attorneys. There's one locally here and then one in Chicago. They each have specialties related to real estate transactions. So the local attorney is working on the subdivision issues related to the nursing homes. You know, the nursing home sits on county property that would need to be subdivided in order to go forward with the RFP. They're very close to having that work done, and have already been meeting with the city of Urbana to talk about with their planning department how that might go. So that has been discussed, and also the attorney in Chicago has been reviewing the draft RFP that we put together, and is also assembling 2 additional contracts that go with that, that would be related to a potential transaction for the home. All of that information will be presented to County Board at the October Committee of the Whole meeting for review, with potential for adoption of that in the County Board meeting in October. If we do that, then what the timeline would be is that the broker would be able to commence marketing activities in November, and we would do that in parallel with the remainder of the subdivision work that needs to be done, and potentially have proposals for the county board to consider as early as January. So their timeline for transaction would only be, I think, 60 to 90 days after that. So I think that a 6-month budget is feasible at this point if we're thinking about a transaction.
I guess I would note a couple things there. We can't pass a 6-month budget. I mean, when we say 6-month budget, it's sort of shorthand for a budget that assumes the nursing home is going to be county operated for 6 months and not county operated for 6 months. But anything we pass has got to be a 12-month budget that runs through the end of the year. We can't do a we'll wait and see what happens budget. I mean, I guess every budget is to some extent a we'll wait and see what happens budget, but we have to basically be able to put something on the books that's a good good faith effort to come up with a 12-month balanced budget. So I just want to make sure when we say 6-month budget, there really is 6 more months on the budget that covers wind down or post-sale or, you know, essentially the transition that would happen after a sale.
I'd like to point out, too, that the budget is no way authorized any kind of sale transaction. It's basically contemplation of what might happen. Any decision on that comes back to the county board once there's been some firm proposal that's been made that fits our parameters. So if the county board at some point decides that it's not the direction it wants to go, the budget can always be amended, too. So that's the other thing I just want to make sure everyone understands.
It is a fair observation. It does take fewer votes to pass a budget than it takes to sell a nursing home. And that's something I think everybody on this board is aware of. And obviously, if we do advance a budget that presumes that the nursing home will be sold in 2018, there is a considerable asterisk next to that, because ultimately this board would have to decide to follow through on a transaction.
Is it possible, Rick, because I know we've talked about the budget not being a actual budget, is it possible to get a 12-month budget to actually see what that type of proposal would look like? Because just seeing the budget be half proposal, hearing what Chris has said, I think he said that before, it just feels like that's not a true option if we're only going to presumably set it for the first 6 months.
The Budget B option, which was in the previous packet, actually describes 12 months of expenditures, but it's 6 months operating and 6 months of wind-down expenses. So that would include things like paying any accounts payable. Obviously, let's assume that a transaction would close on June 30th. We know that we're going to probably have at least 60 days worth of bills still coming in for the nursing home that we'll have to pay because there are obligations. So that includes those costs. It also includes transaction costs with the broker, with our attorneys who need to be involved with the sale, and other things that might, such as employee separation costs. We know that there's accumulated benefits time that will need to be paid out to people who will no longer be county employees. So that's all folded into the Budget B option.
Was that the question you were, I'm not sure that's the question you were asking.
Yeah, I think I was specifically speaking to the decision point, because it feels like that is separate from what I think you're describing, but maybe so the Budget A, I feel like that's set for the whole year. Like it feels like the description there is for the year, but Budget B truly feels like that's not a complete budget projection, I guess.
Well,
It is. I mean, I think that's why I made the comment about terminology. We're calling it a 6-month budget, but it's not. It's a budget that's based on assumption of 6 months of operating expenses for the nursing home and then 6 months of wind down expenses. But I think what was in the original, the two options that were in the original budget packet do cover the full, are apples to apples, essentially. They do cover the 12 months.
But was the decision point described this way? Because I thought it was this same description. That's what I was asking about. If this is truly a 12-month budget proposal, then would it be possible to describe it that way? That's what I was asking. Maybe it's just the language is throwing me. So.
all right, it should be. They're both 12-month.
Yeah, that's why I brought it up earlier.
Okay.
I think we're confusing matters by calling it a 6-month budget.
We can't adopt a 6-month budget per se, but it's conceptually it means 6 months of operations. So.
And I had one more question. Sorry. So this had to do with, I think in the physical plant, their budget proposal, and I don't know if we could pull this back on the table or what has been finally decided, but the ILEAS, the ILEAS, the space that they use, the old nursing home, was that completely taken off the table as a recovery project to fix that space? Because I guess with the closing, there was a $100,000 loss in, I guess, some of the income that could have been recouped from that space. Was that taken off the table, or was that deemed a space not recoverable?
Yeah, it's basically uninhabitable at the current time. Some years ago, when that home, a portion of the home was closed, when the new nursing home building was opened, there were a number of facilities needs that it also had. It's a 1916 building with different additions and such. One of the problems was that the roof was in considerably bad shape at the time, and County Board over the following years didn't have the resources to do any repairs to that building. At some point, I don't know what had happened, maybe it was around 2010 or so, there was water intrusion that began into the building, and so there's a significant amount of mold contamination in there. So at this point, the mitigation of that would be extremely expensive to fully mitigate the basement area, which is the worst area. There are some smaller areas upstairs which could be potentially restored to use with less drastic work. But again, I think it's going to be fairly expensive to bring that back into useful or productive use. So yeah, I think it's, and our facilities director probably give you better details on exactly what those costs would be, but I think it'd be problematic.
Okay, I thought I remember from his conversation that he said there was an estimated demo cost, or someone was quoted, demo cost of $750,000 to $1 million, but I didn't know if, I'm just thinking if that was less than the mitigation, or how that would potentially work. Mitigation and sale of that space, that's what I was thinking about.
Yeah, it's there's in addition to the mold, there's also significant asbestos and lead that needs to be removed from the building, that's, as you know, it's going to be fairly expensive to do that. That's why the cost is so high for demolition of that building.
Okay.
I would note that there is not money for demolition of that building in the draft 2018 budget. I mean, we've proposed that. It has been suggested that that could be done as a part of redoing the ILEAS building or parts thereof as a new location for the sheriff's office if they were to move out of the downtown building. But there's no money in the budget for that at this point. Ms. Petrie, I'm sorry, Jack was next, and then we'll go to Patsy. And before I do that, I wanted to mention, feel free to make comments on any aspect of the budget. I sort of introduced this as a discussion about the nursing home, but this is a hearing about the budget in general. So a number of you have already asked questions about other areas of the budget. I don't want you to feel dissuaded from doing that. Mr. Anderson and then Ms. Petrie.
Just as we're talking 6 months, 12 months, if I'm understanding this right, Chris, when I look at option A and option B, at the bottom line on the handout, budget document we have, choosing option B, we end up with $3.6 million in the good, or in the surplus, which we would, I assume, in turn, use to help pay off our vendors. Where option A, we pretty much, we go through the year running a nursing home, but we still have $4 million in debt. And that's just the difference. And does that play in our decision on any other budgetary concerns? I wouldn't think so, only because the biggest concern would be paying off those vendors with the 3.6, as noted here, unless I'm reading it wrong.
I guess I would ask Mr. Snyder to speak to, and that is 11 million is the number penciled in for what would believe to be the minimum proceeds from a sale. So, Mr. Snyder, if you could speak to how the budget allocates that, and then I guess I would add to your point, Jack, I think the question would be whether or not a budget that doesn't make any allowances for paying the vendors would be realistically considered a balanced budget. And I would argue that it would probably not. I don't know if that was the point you were getting at when you asked about with regard to other budget items. Okay, Mr. Snyder.
All right, so I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but I just want to caution that the $11 million is totally speculative. It is with the best guess of the broker, what they think that the minimum bid for the home should be. It could be more than that. I don't know that, I don't want to, I just want to make sure people understand that's just at this point is just a number that is a best estimate of it. So we know that we'll have to pay all of the existing AP, including the AP that's owed to the county. We also have the retirement of the general obligation bond. That's the $4 million bond that was issued for the remedial work done at the nursing home after the main construction was completed. I believe at this point, there's still about $2.5 million left in principal on that. Tammy, do you know about what it is
2
now?
million.
Is it down to 2 million now? Okay, so 2 million there. All told, after paying all of the obligations of the home, not including the original construction bond, which is going to be retired within about 4 years. By 2021, we'll have that paid off. It should leave about $3.6 million in proceeds that are not committed. My thoughts are that that could go to the general fund balance to help restore that. It also could also be allocated to capital asset replacement fund because that has been neglected for many years, and it's declining. So we don't have money to replace a lot of the things that we normally would, like computers and other equipment on a regular schedule. So that would be certainly a way to invest that money. There may be other needs that the board will identify. I don't know. We've talked about facilities needs. We've talked about also funding things like a behavioral health or crisis response center. That might be money. Might be money that would be available to do those things. But again, it's just because it's speculative right now. I don't want to talk too much about that. But I think it's a possibility.
I would make a distinction between something like that, which would be a one-time infusion of money, and something that's ongoing, right? When we talk about supporting programs, or when we talk about major facilities problems that would require bonded debt, obviously both of those require a reliable annual revenue stream, which this would not be. This would essentially be a one-time adjustment to the fund balance, which you could allocate over the next several years, or which you could use to, for a specific purpose, but it's not money that obviously is going to be there in subsequent years. I was also going to make a point to make sure I understand this about the retirement of the main building bonds for the nursing home. There are 4 more years of repayment on that. Those are paid by a dedicated tax levy, and my understanding is that that tax levy cannot be used for anything else, and that at the time that those building bonds are retired, that tax levy is not, that tax levy, because it's a capital project, is not subject to PTEL and would basically just go away. Is that my understanding?
That's correct. The amount that's allocated for the bonds is not part of the PTEL aggregate base. Therefore, it's not available to shifting or moving to different levies as we do some of the others. We make adjustments to IMRF and some of the other levies depending on the needs of those areas. So we couldn't touch that, and that would simply drop off the tax rolls at that point.
So the nursing home operating tax subsidy will presumably be fully spoken for through 2018, because I expect the tax anticipation warrants will be taken out against it in December of this year. So I think the earliest that you could look at that money being available under the levy cap, if this board chose to capture it, would be for the 2019 tax year.
That's correct. And one thing I do want to point out too, I know that the Crisis Response Planning Committee has been working a lot on what they see are needs for the community. I don't know that they're going to, at this point, recommend that a facility be built for that, but the services, I think, are the main priority at this point. Those services, I think, are going to require a collaborative effort among Champaign County municipalities, as well as special districts like the CU PhD and County Board of Health and the Mental Health Board. The kind of services we're talking about can't be funded solely by the county, and we just simply don't have the revenue. Even if we put all of it in, we wouldn't have enough to do everything that's needed. So it needs to be a collaborative effort. And I think it's appropriate because, everyone would benefit, I think, from such services being provided to the community.
Thank you, Mr. Snyder. Ms. Petrie, thank you for your patience.
That's okay. You mentioned that SAK was projecting 50% of Medicaid as they were going forward with their budget. And previously, when MPA ran those 3 models, it came to the point that to create a sustainable budget for the nursing home, that Medicaid needed to hover at 40%. I do think that's something that needs to be chatted with SAK and their projections. Maybe they're saving so much that they feel it can be at 50%. But I want to make certain that the projections they're working on are realistic. And I'm a little concerned if they think 50 will do it when another model was 40, that we really anchor as best as we can this information as we move forward on our decision-making process.
That's the 40 model, that was the MPA model? Okay.
I think there's been,
Remember, they ran 3 models, and the one that showed the projection longitudinally for sustainable. Now, since sustainable didn't mean making money, it just meant it could pay everything, vendors and everything, was at 40%.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, just to
Rick and then
comment
Mr.
quickly.
Mitchell.
Just, I think that the improvements that operationally that SAK has implemented are going to probably explain part of that difference. Also, I will say that in their census, they do show increased numbers of Medicaid patients in that scenario. So they expect to obtain additional revenue through Medicaid, but it's still keeping that percentage below, well, it's 51%.
May I respond? Well, if they increase Medicaid, the rough math is that every time you increase Medicaid, then you got to figure out how to increase Medicare to do the balancing. It's a 2-to-1 roughly right now as the monies stand. So if they up that, then we have to figure out the other.
Well, part of it also is the fact that you're amortizing some of the costs. There's fixed costs that are you have to invest in to run the home. So even though you may be increasing, the Medicaid census, you still get revenue out of them. And so there's sweet spots that develop, I think, with the model. But you're right that, obviously a Medicaid person doesn't directly cover all the expenses that are incurred for their care.
Mr. Mitchell.
You've got 4 years remaining on a construction bond before it's retired. How would that be affected and encumbered in a sale?
I mean, I think the short answer is it wouldn't. We built the building and we took out the loan and we assigned the tax levy to it. And I think basically whether the nursing home expanded, sold, or closed, we're still on the hook, and the taxpayers are still on the hook for paying those bonds off, regardless of who owns the building. I don't know, Rick, am I on the right track there?
I believe that's the correct analysis based on consultation with legal counsel. If an asteroid hit the building today, we would still have the levy to pay the bonds, and we have to satisfy the bondholders under the covenants.
So it wouldn't be accelerated based upon a sale?
The requirement to repay would certainly not be accelerated. It wouldn't be like a callable, mortgage. Whether those bonds are even callable between now and 4 years from now would be a question, I guess, for Rick or Tammy.
They are not.
Okay, so we couldn't even retire. We couldn't even pay them off early if we felt so inclined. I mean, you could earmark money to be used specifically for retiring them potentially, but I don't even know if that's true, because I mean it's not general corporate money, right? It's a completely independent tax levy.
The levy money is independent of us, but any sale proceeds would be deposited in the general fund. So because we're also obligated to pay all the bills, so essentially we're responsible for the bills, but we also get the benefit of any proceeds that might be remaining from a sale.
And can you remind me what the approximate dollar amount remaining on those is? Is it $5 million?
On the original construction bond?
The outstanding principal on the original construction bond.
That sounds about right, isn't it?
I think the total principal and interest is closer to $6 million. I'm not sure what the split is between the two, though.
Okay, so basically the taxpayer's on the hook for that, no matter what happens. And after 4 years, that tax levy just goes away.
I think it was 6.6 at the end of last year, but I don't know what that will be after this year.
I'm sorry, Mr. March.
When we talked about in the scenario of the full year operating budget, it set aside the vendor payments. Did the budget include that part of those vendor payments that we've committed to, the agreements we've made for monthly payments based on conversation or concern by the vendor, the agreements we came to?
Rick, do you know the status of those in the SAK budget?
We had, it would include enough money to manage the current cash flow. As we've seen from Treasurer Welch's reports, we kind of know what our revenue's been and what our anticipated debt repayment needs are each month. So that would basically maintain that. We would not make any progress on paying down the debt. So just to clarify that.
I'm not sure.
We make payments according to our schedule, but only 2 of the vendors are no longer providing services to us. So those are essentially monies that are going out and lowering their debts to us. But the other vendors are also billing new services to us. So even though we're continuing to pay those off, we have new bills coming in. So it's basically, it's just keeping us from going further into debt with those vendors.
What I think I heard you say was it would account for ongoing expenses going forward, and it would account for the cash flow that is currently going to pay off old vendors at the rate they are currently being paid off. Is that what I heard you say, or just keeping current and not accounting for? I mean, we're already paying off. We are paying down past debt at some rate right now.
Right.
So you're saying that the SAK budget continues that.
Correct.
And pays for current services.
We have about $40,000 a month we're paying off to the the previous dietary company. Those bills will decline soon because those reflect many months out in our aging. They'll decline because the census will start. The census that was being used to calculate those bills starts going down. So by the time we go down on those, it'll be probably, the last bills will probably only be about $20,000 a month. But we've been making those monthly payments. We also have $30,000 a month we're paying to the medical supply vendor who's no longer being used. However, we've made probably, I'm going to say 6 or 7 payments, so we probably only have about 5 more payments left on that, and then those will drop out. So there will be some improvement from that, but we will just keep up with, we're basically trying to keep it at a status quo over the course of the next year. So we're not going to be able to, we have some vendors who are still owed $300,000 or $400,000. We're not going to be able to just pay those off. We're probably going to continue to have a high level of AP with those vendors. It's just that we're going to pay the older bills and replace them with newer bills. I don't know if does that answer your question?
Yeah, does that, okay, thank you. Yeah, it's a good question. What exactly is included in that expense line? Mr. McGuire.
Thank you. I think S&K is doing a much better job moving the nursing home forward. And I have an expectation that asset of the nursing home will be there in the future, but I don't believe we will be involved in it. When you're discussing the nursing home and what they're paying monthly, they're still not making their bills by $160,000 a month or vendor. I mean, this is a budget. It's a best guess of what will happen next year. They borrowed $500,000 to make payroll in the last 3 or 4 months. The expectation is that a lot of that will happen next year. Problem is we don't have reserves or a general budget to do that if we support a 1-year budget and try to keep doing what we're doing, which isn't helpful for our budget. We talked about, because census is a major part of what they suggest is going to help the budget. They say it's going to grow to 183 in 3 years. That's almost a 30% increase in census, and I hope they're successful. One of the things I look at is it wasn't a few months ago that the census was 139. I think it just stated that now it's 135. I think they will improve the census. I just don't believe we'll be involved in that. I think it's time we move forward and make a decision about what we're going to do with our budget, and that budget, based on the loan that we gave a few months ago, was a 6-month budget. And I think we need to move up option B and move forward. Gives us an option to look at what's going to happen in the future with the nursing home, whatever comes forward from the broker, and then we can make a decision on that and make what is the right decision for the county budget. We can't continue to divert funds from a lot of important programs and responsibilities this county has. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McGuire. Back to Mr. Anderson. So I just want to make sure nobody else want to get in front of you.
Following up on Mr. McGuire's comments, at this time, what would be the appropriate motion for this board to give direction to the administrator? Because I would like to move that we get a vote of consensus from this board on whether or not we support Budget A or Budget B.
I think after we hear everybody who wants to be heard, I don't think we really need a motion, but we maybe a straw poll to indicate support for one or the other would be appropriate. But I would like to make sure everybody's got a chance to speak. Ms. Michaels?
Well, I'm happy that things are changing at the nursing home. However, I think realistically, because we've gone through this not just in the last year or 2 years, it's been changing for the last 7 or 8 years or even before that. I'd like to see us use option B within our budget. And remember that a budget is your guideline. It can be changed. It's usually something that's pretty steady, but then at the same time, no one knows what's going to happen. I'm worried about paying the vendors also. I don't think any one of us in here want to leave our creditors hanging for as long as we've left them. And I do also believe that there's other people that have better expertise in making the home profitable. So I would like to see us put Budget B into plan and then go forward with that. Certainly if things change in the first 90 days or 120 days, we can make adjustments. But I just don't see where that census is going to come up and make these numbers come anywhere near what we need to. And we certainly can't put the general fund in flux without some kind of information on that.
Thank you, Ms. Michaels. Mr. Gust, I see you down there.
Thank you. I think the biggest reason to support B is my fear of A is that they kick the can down the road budget and the perception that it puts out there with our vendors that say, hey, some of them, like you said, Mr. Alex, they don't mind getting that 12 or 13% interest, but some of those people want to be paid, and the fact that we put together a budget that I question even the legality of it without a debt repayment on there, I think they're going to look at that and say, really, we're going to go through this again? And what happens if one of the bigger ones comes and says, put us on a payment plan, now we're back to trying to fight through it, or B, something, we don't increase census, it doesn't get a lot better, and all of a sudden now we're just month after month, we're bringing budget amendments, we're borrowing more money out of a general fund that we really, as Ms. Ogden has presented and Mr. Snyder have presented, a general fund that we really don't have room to borrow much more money. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Harkey.
I just think it's highly irresponsible for us to budget for a sale when we don't even have an offer on the table yet. So I think we need to budget for 12 months because that's what we're probably going to have. I don't think there's any guarantee that this thing's going to be sold in 6 months. And if it does sell and the votes are there to sell it, then we can I'm sure you'll get the budget amendments then to adjust the necessary plan to fit that sale. In the meantime, I think people ought to be prepared to possibly have this thing longer than 6 months.
Thank you, Mr. Harkey. Anybody else? Mr. King.
So Rick, I apologize if you don't have the number in front of you, but this was under the expenditure analysis in the general county section of the budget proposal. There was a number for the employer contribution to employee health and life insurance for the general court fund employees, and I wanted to know if that was impacted at all by the recent insurance, if that number was impacted by the final insurance proposal, I guess.
Well, I anticipate that the employee contributions aren't going to change. There's an increase for the employer, of course, but because it's very moderate this year, I think it's not going to cause a big issue for the nursing home.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. King. Ms. Cruz.
Mr. Alex, how many votes is it for a budget amendment? Is it 15?
15.
Okay, thank you.
Have you given much exploratory thought if it comes to pass that the nursing home moves from under the county to a new owner and it is a break-even situation, then what does that begin to free up in relationship to the monies within the county and some of the ways that this could help us move forward on the issues that you had up there on the slide? Wasn't it 5 or 6 that were evolving out of the conversations at the Strategic Planning Committee meetings?
So just so make sure I understand your question. So if there were a transaction to move forward, but it didn't produce the $11 million that has been, floated, let's say it's $7 million or something like that, and just enough to pay maybe our accounts payable and the GO bond debt. So there wouldn't be any of there's $3.6 million that's estimated that would go to the general fund or capital asset replacement. That would result in a general fund reserve level of about 22% if it all went there. But you could dial that down, but if there's none of that there, we would get the improvement from the payoff of the county AP. The loans don't impact the fund balance because those are balance sheet transactions, so it's an accountant's way of hiding that stuff. But the only thing that would improve the fund balance is the AP, and that's about $500,000 approximately. But that would restore the balance to the 12.5% required level under our policies. Now, in terms of recurring revenue, I would say that the almost $300,000 that's going to be allocated now towards the GO bond debt service would be freed up for other uses. That could certainly be invested in other programming at the time, or it may need to go to facilities needs, but that would be a decision for the board. And then again, the other recurring revenue would be the opportunity to move some of the or all of the operating levy into the general fund. Under PTEL, there used to be a requirement that or a limit on the rate for the general fund of 25 cents. But that changed under PTEL. So, in fact, the county's current general fund rate is like 27 cents, somewhere around there. So it's already over that old limit. But that wouldn't exist under PTEL. So that would free up about, based on revenue year 17 numbers, or revenue year 18 numbers, I think it's $1.266 million. So the county would need to decide how it would want to invest that money. So it's a significant amount of money that's available, in addition to monies that are currently being pulled aside that are in the budget right now that are having to be dedicated towards nursing home needs.
You may.
Thank you very much. So when you put that along with the fact that there will be a bond paid off at the end of the year, and that opens up some opportunities should the board choose for borrowing some money, then dovetailing those two together, what do you foresee the county maybe being able to do?
Well, we have some pretty significant facilities needs. We went through the facilities condition assessment last year, and we developed the plan for the county. There's $40 million or more in projects there, including about $23 million just in deferred maintenance. So there's no end to the needs that the county would have in terms of facilities. But we've also talked about some of the needs of behavioral health and reentry. We already make some investments now with some of the public safety sales tax through the Youth Assessment Center and then the Reentry Council. And that's one thing that we do need to talk about. Previously in this year, when Mr. Heiser was here, we had discussed when we did the renewal of the reentry contract with Rosecrans that there would be an evaluation of that contract and a decision made as to whether we would continue that investment or reallocate it maybe to a different reentry program or some other need. And so I think that that's a discussion which we'll need to get into fairly soon regardless of these budget decisions.
Well, that goes to Ms. Petrie's earlier question about status of that program. Yeah, so. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Chair. I guess when it comes to potentially budgeting for a sale, I don't have a problem with it. A budget is a guideline. It isn't truly fixed. It's all based on estimates. On the nursing home that's in front of us in today's package, there's, for the nursing home specifically, gasoline and oil. It had $33,600 for the budget A and $22,400 for budget B. Well, I kind of doubt that budgeted in there is, should gas go up $2 more a gallon? I doubt that's in the budget. It's an estimate. The 300-some thousand for the sheriff's radios, I don't believe that that's a true, actual good number. That's an estimate. It could come in less by chance. It could come in more. And if it does, we'll have to change the budget through amendments. So the idea that it's irresponsible to budget for a potential sale, to me, doesn't hold water. Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, just a couple closing comments, I guess, on what I think I've heard tonight. I think the thing I'm taking home is we've got two budget options here, and I think both of them are significantly deficient in one way or another. I mean, Mr. Harkey correctly identified the problem with budget B, which is if we budget for a sale, there are two possible, or it might happen. If it doesn't happen, it could not happen for two reasons. It would happen because this board decides not to go through with the sale, in which case we wouldn't be able to fulfill the budget. It would happen because there was not a buyer, or the buyer was only willing to offer substantially less than the amount that's anticipated, or wasn't able to come to terms with the county, wasn't able to agree to operate the facility based on the terms that we would demand. So if we do move forward with option B, then I think we probably want to look at that 11 million number, decide whether we want to be more conservative in terms of that number, and look at how that budget can be made to absorb the contingency that this sale might be delayed or might fall through, or any number of other negative outcomes. I mean, one thing we could do in that budget that would help with that, we could look at delaying. I mean, we was mentioning the radios, we talked about facilities work, so forth. I mean, to the extent that any major capital expenditures can be delayed until after the point in the year where we believe that the sale would happen might be appropriate, because that would give the county some of the cash flow flexibility to maybe dig ourselves out if it turned out that a sale didn't happen for 9 months or didn't happen for 12 months. with regard to Budget A, and I'll credit Mr. Goss for this, although I heard Mr. Anderson say almost the same thing, is, it's deficient in that it really does not acknowledge that we have this, several $1 million worth of vendor debt out there, which, I mean, it's sort of easy to take a step back from that and say, hey, that we already accrued it, we're going to set that aside. But, this is money that vendors provided service for the county in exchange for payment and sent us invoices, and we didn't pay them. And as a small business owner who occasionally has that issues with my own clients, it's not, there is no little hardship associated with not getting paid. So, we are the stewards of the taxpayers' money, and we have an obligation to pay our bills. So this is difficult for me to, I would say that if we're going to proceed with Plan B, the sale plan budget, we do need to look carefully at the potential proceeds and look at ways that we might be able to hedge against potentially unforeseen circumstances. If we do proceed with A, I think we need to basically identify where else in the county budget we're going to be able to come up with the money to make sure that we're paying off those vendor debts. So I would say we have two budgets here that are going to both need a fair bit of work between now and the time they were approved. Mr. Summers.
I'll be very brief. I do agree with Mr. Esri. A budget has a lot of intangibles. I guess I'm looking at it from the opposite side, since we actually don't have an offer on the nursing home. I don't know how comfortable I am planning on the sale, and particularly if we're talking about, we may be looking at moving the number down. We're talking about a property we're trying to sell. I'm not quite sure that's a position that I would like to be in. So I understand where you're coming from. I think we're just looking at it from your side and from my side.
Yes, sir, Mr. McGuire.
Yes, as I understand, this is a special meeting of the Finance Committee of the COW. Are we going to make a decision tonight? We have people here that came to this meeting based on the fact there was going to be a vote, and they missed other important meetings. So we're going to follow through with making a decision about the budget tonight.
Well, we need to give the county administrator a recommendation as to which of budget A or B we prefer, yeah.
Okay.
I was proposing to do that with a straw poll, but if you want to vote, we can do a vote. I mean,
I'd rather have a vote, thank you.
okay, vote is up or down on one option or the other. So
I'd like to make a motion on motion B to be voted, to be support.
We have a motion to, which I'll try to say what it means, ask the county administrator to proceed with preparing option B as the draft, as including for inclusion in the draft budget. Did I capture your motion?
Yes, it is.
Thank you. Is there any discussion on the motion?
I would ask a roll call.
Ms. Petrie?
Oh, well, I have a couple of information.
I'm sorry, do we have a second on the roll call?
It's
okay. Thank you, Ms.
Okay,
Petrie.
sorry. I'm sorry I didn't get these in before Mr. McGuire made his motion. Not that it would have stopped him from doing that, but it would have been a better order. First of all, we're tossing around a number of 11 million. So my question is that just about back of the envelope calculation of the optimistic view of that's what is needed to help pay off the vendors and get to a clean slate? That's number one. And then number two is Mr. Alex gave a summary of the deficiencies on both sides of the budget. Is it better to give direction to the county administrator to take into consideration those pointed out deficiencies and let us relook at these budgets before we give direction on them?
I mean, you can vote no. I think it's useful for the county administrator to know which direction members of this committee are likely, or which of these two budgets members of this committee are likely to support going forward. If there's one of these variants that is clearly not going to get majority support, then it's probably not worth spending a lot of effort on. But I will note that this is going to come back, whatever we decide here is going to come back to this committee and this board several times, and that given the deficiencies they identified, I suspect whatever we see, I mean, we're not going to see this exact same thing come back, or it's probably not going to get approved by anybody. Additional comments? Okay, Mr. Snyder, I'm not sure how much direction this is going to give you, but would you please call the roll for sending, recommending budget B, which I'll interpret as a budget that involves 6 months of operations of the normal operations of the nursing home and a sale after approximately 6 months, and attempting to work out a draft budget based on that scenario.
Goss,
Yes.
Harper,
Yes.
Hartke,
No.
King, Marsh,
Yes.
McGuire,
Yes.
Michaels, Mitchell, Patterson,
No.
Petrie,
Yes.
Rector, Summers, Weibel, Anderson, Clemens,
Yes.
Cowart, Cruz, Esri,
Yes.
Alex.
Could the clerk identify the result of the vote?
Sorry, 12-6.
Motion carries 12-6.
Please, 12 is 7.
Sorry, 12-7.
Motion carries 12-7. Thank you. Guidance as far as what will happen here, obviously I expect there'll be individual communications with the county administrator with regard to things that are happening, and Deputy County Administrator for Finance with regard to things that are happened here. We will need to turn whatever we do into a budget that's going to get majority support of this board. And I will express the concern right now that if we do come up with a budget that is based on a majority of this board, but is not able to be implemented due to the inability to get 15 votes to do whatever it is it implies that we're going to do down the road, it's not real useful. So I would encourage those who are not supportive of this option to talk to me, talk to other board members, work with the county administrator to discuss ways in which we may be able to come to terms on a budget going forward. So this is the beginning, not the end, and I appreciate all the comments that were made here tonight. Yes, sir, Mr. McGuire.
Thank you. Is the budget usually the whole budget, not just the nursing home, or the nursing home budget? So you vote on the whole thing, right? Secondly,
That's correct. The budget,
yes,
the
and
county budget is one vote.
And this does not state anywhere that it's selling the nursing home.
Well, it makes the assumption that the nursing home will be sold. I mean,
This is a
am I not hearing
process.
you?
We don't know how it's going to turn out. The other thing is, this is not, the budget is 6 months, but it's 9 months before this budget ends in July. This is October.
Well, the budget is
The
12 months.
the
The
process,
budget is 12 months.
the budget will be 12 months, but the 6-month part we're talking about is July. But right now, it's the end of September. The process for selling it is 9 months, between now and the end of July. So it's not actually, well, it's a 6-month budget. If there is a sale, it has 9 months. And we can amend the budget, as everybody said, in 7 months, 8 months. So
think I
there's
agree
more
with, I think I agree with I don't think I disagree with anything you just said, although I'm not sure I followed it all.
it's not, everything is not as in concrete as everybody perceives or states it to be. There's a lot of opportunity to make decisions and different decision points.
Well, I mean, this budget alone has to get through 3 more, the overall county budget alone has to get through 3 more votes. So, yes, I would agree with that. And my concern, which I'll reiterate, is we may find ourselves in a position of writing a check that we later decide not to cash, which is something that I think we'd like to avoid. If we think there's a possibility that that may happen, we need to build that into whatever budget we come up with as a contingency. I don't think we can approve a budget that presumes that we're going to get 15 votes to do anything. I can't say how I'm going to vote when the time comes, so I'm sure nobody else can either. So I think we need to look at contingencies and look at a way that we can come up with a budget that gives the taxpayers a realistic expectation of what may happen in the coming year, which is, of course, the whole point. Any other comments or questions on the county budget? Any other recommendations with regard to other parts of the budget? Seeing none, I will relinquish the virtual gavel to Mr. Weibel.
Is there any other business? Seeing none, we're adjourned.